They will never show it. They will never say it. But make no mistake, the narcissist is suffering. And not in the way people usually do. This isn't the kind of pain you see with tears or hear through confession. This is the kind of pain that hides behind expensive clothes, loud laughs, and curated silence. It's the suffering that comes when God finally says, "That's enough." You didn't just walk away, you were removed. Heaven stepped in. God separated you from what was quietly killing your spirit, and the one who thought they had all the control. They're now the one losing it, behind closed doors. This is C.S. Lewis 2025, a YouTube channel where we don't just expose manipulation, we reveal what God does in the aftermath. And today, I'm going to show you 5 unmistakable signs that the narcissist is deeply suffering after God removed you from their life. They may not admit it, but their soul is paying the price. Let's begin. 1. Nothing brings them joy anymore. There is a silence that comes after rebellion. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that echoes through the soul when God no longer sends someone to stand in the gap. That's the silence the narcissist is living in now, and no matter how they dress it up, no matter how many vacations they take or people they surround themselves with, it's there. It follows them from morning until night. It haunts them in boardrooms and bedrooms, in conversations and in moments of solitude. Because when God removes his servant from someone's life, not because the servant failed, but because the recipient refused to change, what's left behind isn't peace, it's absence. And absence, for a narcissist, is unbearable. They used to mock your sensitivity. They rolled their eyes at your prayers. They called your compassion weakness and your silence manipulation. They didn't understand that the very presence they dismissed was the only thing keeping God's hand from acting in full. You were the mercy. You were the final warning. You were the undeserved grace that still showed up with kindness even after they cursed you behind closed doors. And now that grace is gone. So now they try to find pleasure in the things that used to excite them, but it doesn't feel the same. The thrill is muted. The applause doesn't land. Even the praise of others feels like noise bouncing off a hollow wall, because there's no one left who truly sees them. Not the mask, not the performance. Them. And while they used to run from being truly seen, now they're starting to realize it's what they needed all along. The soul can't thrive in artificial light. And the kind of light you carried was real, costly even. It came from prayer. It came from nights you stayed up crying for them while they were lying to you. It came from a closeness with God they didn't understand but were still benefiting from. That's why they were never completely consumed. That's why their lies didn't always ruin their lives. That's why doors still opened and rooms still welcomed them. Because someone was interceding, someone was covering, someone was standing between them and what they deserved. And now, you're gone. They think they're in control, but God is no longer restraining the consequences. He's letting discomfort teach what truth could not. He's letting absence speak louder than your presence ever could. And though they'll never admit it, something in them knows. The joy they once felt when they had you around wasn't about you spoiling them. It wasn't about attention. It was about proximity to God's grace. Now, they sit in rooms full of people and feel utterly alone. They celebrate wins that leave them feeling emptier than before. They go through motions, but their heart isn't in it. Because that joy wasn't coming from within them. It was coming through you. It was God loving them through you, warning them through you, softening judgment through you. And now that you've been removed, not because of drama, but because of divine order, there is no shield left. Their blessings feel forced. Their peace has vanished. Their routines feel meaningless, and the worst part is, no one else sees it, only God and the narcissist. Because when God removes his messenger, he also removes the atmosphere that held the enemy back. And now, the narcissist is discovering what it feels like to live without favor, without spiritual covering, without joy. They are surrounded by opportunities, but everything feels stale. They smile, but it feels like work. They post pictures of vacations, but the emptiness follows them there. Because you weren't just someone they knew, you were an assignment. You were the last light in a life they tried to control with darkness. And when they chose ego over humility, image over intimacy, lies over truth, God made the separation permanent. This is not punishment. This is reality. This is what it looks like when heaven stops making excuses for someone. They're not just living without you. They're living under weight. And that weight is what begins the breaking, not from the outside, but from the inside, where the soul screams for what the flesh rejected. This is why nothing brings them joy anymore, not because life is hard, but because God is gone. 2. Their envy has turned into torment, because what God is doing in you now exposes what they lost. One of the most unmistakable signs that the narcissist is deeply suffering is that they are now consumed by a kind of envy that doesn't just sting, it torments. Not the surface-level jealousy they always carried, the one masked by backhanded compliments and competitive behavior. No, this is something deeper, something more spiritual. It's the kind of torment that enters a person when they are forced to witness what they used to belittle rise without them. Before, they mocked your faith. They rolled their eyes when you prayed. They smirked when you talked about healing, about growth, about purpose. In their minds, you were weak, naive, someone they could twist, tame, and manipulate to their liking. You were something to control, not someone to value. But what they didn't realize is that God was using their arrogance to elevate you, that even in the betrayal, in the silence, in the dehumanization, you were being refined. And now, they see it. They see the doors opening in your life. They hear your name spoken with honor. They feel the warmth of God's favor shining on someone they once treated like dust. And they can't handle it. At first, they'll pretend not to notice. They'll act indifferent, but behind that calm exterior is a war raging. They are watching you rise, and every step you take forward becomes a mirror to their failure. Not just failure to keep you, but failure to see you. Failure to protect what God had placed in front of them. You were never ordinary, but they treated you as if you were, and now they're realizing you were rare, you were covered, you were assigned. The envy they carry now isn't passive, it's violent, not outwardly, but internally. It shows up in their restlessness, in their short temper, in the way they suddenly post more often, brag louder, chase harder. Why? Because they're trying to compete with a destiny that no longer includes them. They're trying to replace the irreplaceable. And the more they try, the more they spiral. Because nothing they chase can recreate what they forfeited. The truth is, your breakthrough haunts them. Your healing exposes their sickness. Your glow makes their shadow feel darker. You're not just moving on, you're being vindicated. Publicly, spiritually, and undeniably. And that's the kind of envy that doesn't go away. Because it's not about what you have. It's about who's blessing you. They can't compete with heaven. And deep down they know they lost more than a connection. They lost access to someone who carried the atmosphere of God. They lost the only person who loved them beyond performance. They lost the vessel that was standing in the gap while they continued to play God. They scroll through your photos now with clenched fists and a bitter heart, telling themselves stories to justify their decision. She changed. He thinks he's better than me now. I dodged a bullet. But that's not truth. That's pain, wearing the mask of pride. And it's not working anymore, because no matter what they tell themselves, they feel the ache. They feel the loss. They feel the distance. And it's not just between them and you, it's between them and God. Because when someone mishandles what God sends, there is a spiritual consequence. And part of that consequence is having to watch the person they misused flourish. To see the person they called too much become exactly what the world needed. To hear your name spoken in rooms they prayed you'd never enter. That's not coincidence. That's God. That's divine justice playing out in real time. And it hurts them more than they will ever admit. So if you're seeing your life expand, if you're watching favor fall and wondering why it feels bittersweet, remember this: the narcissist is watching too, and what brings you joy now is what brings them sorrow. Not because you wished them harm, but because they never imagined you'd rise once they walked away. You are the evidence that God restores. You are the reminder that rejection is often redirection, and your glow is a silent rebuke to every lie they told themselves about your worth. If this word is stirring something deep inside of you, don't let it pass. Let heaven and hell know you're still standing by commenting below, "I'm rising. God is with me." 3. They're not building anything, they're just running from themselves. There comes a point after God removes his child from the grip of the narcissist where the narcissist begins to move frantically. On the outside, it might look like progress: new jobs, new homes, new goals, new relationships. It might seem to others that they're leveling up, evolving, moving forward. But that's only because those on the outside don't see what heaven sees. They don't realize that this isn't vision. It's avoidance. They're not climbing, they're escaping, and what they're running from isn't a person. It's a shadow, a presence, a memory that lingers. They're running from the truth of who they really are when no one is left to pretend for. When you were in their life, they had a distraction. You were someone to project onto, to manipulate, to blame, to accuse. As long as you were there, you absorbed what they couldn't carry within themselves. You became the target of every insecurity they refused to face. They called you dramatic when in truth they were overwhelmed by their own emotional chaos. They said you were too sensitive when really they envied your ability to feel. They labeled you as unstable when in fact you were being crushed under the weight of their instability. You were the sponge, soaking in all the spiritual toxicity they wouldn't confess to God. But now, God has removed you. And with your absence, the noise stops, the target disappears, and they are left with themselves. No more scapegoat, no more distraction, no one to shout over, no one to tear down, no one to absorb their torment. And that silence, that stillness, it's unbearable to them. So they run. They work longer hours. They fill their calendars. They sign up for new ventures they have no passion for. They jump from one shallow connection to another, claiming they've moved on, when in reality they've become spiritually homeless. There is no stillness in their soul, no rest in their spirit, because rest requires honesty, and they've built their entire life on denial. They don't chase because they have ambition. They chase because they are terrified of what they might feel if they stopped moving. Because if they were to sit in one place long enough, they'd have to face what they've done. They'd have to face the truth, that the peace they felt when you were near wasn't theirs. It was borrowed. That the clarity they experienced during conversations wasn't their own wisdom, it was yours. That the stability in their world wasn't because they had it all together, but because you were holding everything together behind the scenes. And now, without you, things are starting to crack, slowly but surely, not in a way that garners attention, but in the quiet, private places no one else sees. They can't focus. They can't sleep. They can't finish what they start. Their mind jumps from thought to thought. Their spirit flinches at every pause in momentum. They have to keep moving, not because they are being led by vision, but because they are being chased by conviction. It is the torment God allows, not to destroy them, but to confront them. He lets them spiral, not out of cruelty, but because repentance doesn't grow in comfort. So he removes comfort, he removes distractions, he removes the person he once used as a buffer, and he replaces them with silence. And that silence begins to speak. You see, there's something holy about the way God lets consequences unfold. He doesn't always strike with thunder. Sometimes he simply removes the mercy and lets the soul unravel naturally. That's what's happening now. They're trying to rebuild, but there's no foundation. They're trying to make new plans, but they're haunted by what they lost. They think they're launching forward, but spiritually they are circling the same mountain over and over, just with different scenery. They tell people they're doing great, that the past is behind them, but deep in their bones, they know it's a lie. They know something shifted when you left. They can't name it, but they feel it, an unease, an unrest, a void. They scroll through social media longer. They keep music on at night to drown out the silence. They jump into distractions faster and stay in them longer, not because they're building something new, but because stillness terrifies them now. Stillness reminds them of the prayer you used to whisper, of the way you carried peace, even in the chaos they created, of how you would pause and listen when they raised their voice, of how you never returned evil for evil, because you were grounded in something they didn't understand. And now they realize that the only stability they ever truly knew came through someone they dishonored. The whirlwind they live in now isn't from God, it's self-inflicted, and every step they take to avoid themselves becomes another layer of the prison they're building from the inside out. They can't stop, because stopping would mean seeing themselves, seeing what they did, seeing what they lost, and more than anything, seeing who you really were. They're not building, they're burying the truth, burying regret, burying guilt. But heaven doesn't let that burial stay quiet forever. There will come a time, if it hasn't already, where the cracks in their false confidence will split wide open, and in that moment, they won't be able to outrun what they refuse to face. This is what judgment looks like in the life of someone who once seemed untouchable. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not always immediate, but it is real. And when God removes his covering and with it removes his messenger, the restlessness left behind becomes its own form of justice, a justice that doesn't need thunder to be heard, because it speaks directly to the soul. And the soul, unlike the mask, cannot lie. For they are surrounded by people, yet spiritually alone, because connection without covenant is just noise. From the outside, the narcissist looks anything but lonely. They're often surrounded by people, new friends, new romantic partners, co-workers, admirers, and enablers. There may be dinner parties, vacations, flirtation, loud laughter, and endless phone calls. But make no mistake, they have never been lonelier than they are right now. Why? Because God has removed from their life the one soul that carried his presence, his patience, his purity. That person was you. You see, connection means nothing without covenant, and covenant can't be formed with manipulation, control, or performance. Covenant requires truth. It requires humility. It requires repentance. The narcissist has never made room for those things. Every relationship they've ever built has been rooted in strategy, not surrender. Intimacy for them was a weapon, not a place of rest. So now, all the people in their orbit may look like community, but in the spiritual realm, it's nothing but a crowd with no covering. They once had someone who sat with them in their darkest moods and didn't run, someone who stayed and listened when they didn't deserve to be heard, someone who knew their flaws, their lies, their broken pieces, and still tried to love them back to life. That someone was you, and even though they disrespected your presence, even though they rejected your boundaries, mocked your sensitivity, and gaslit your discernment, something deep in them knew that what they had with you was different. It was real, but now the real is gone, and in its place are shadows, echoes, surface-level interactions that never touch their soul. People who laugh at their jokes but would never pray over them. People who are entertained by them but not anchored to them. They're in relationships where performance is currency and silence is punishment. They talk more but say less. They're touched more but never held in spirit. They are praised more but never known. Because when God removes his child, especially one who carried his light into a toxic environment, the spiritual atmosphere shifts. The narcissist may not have the vocabulary for it, but they feel it. The shallowness, the disconnection, the loneliness that creeps in right after a crowded room empties. They may not believe in spiritual covering, but they now know what it feels like to live without one. And in their quiet moments, the comparison begins. They compare their new supply, their new friends, new lovers, to you. At first they convince themselves it's better, easier, more fun. But over time they realize something is missing. It's not the way you spoke, or the way you touched them. It's not the way you looked, or the things you did. What's missing is the depth, the presence, the holiness, the safety of being with someone who genuinely cared for their soul. That kind of connection can't be replaced with charisma. It can't be duplicated by charm. Because what they had through you wasn't natural, it was sacred. It was divine covering, poured through an imperfect but willing vessel. And when they rejected you, they weren't just discarding a person, they were severing their connection to something heaven had allowed them to experience as mercy. Now, their life is full of people, but void of presence. They're never alone, yet always isolated. They talk all day, but feel misunderstood. They sleep beside others, but wake up more restless than ever. They laugh louder now, but the ache in their chest has grown quieter and deeper, because the torment of the narcissist isn't that they lost someone. It's that they lost the only one who saw them for who they really were, and stayed. And now that you're gone, no matter who fills the space beside them, no one else will ever fill the space within them, because you weren't just someone they dated. You weren't just a chapter in their story. You were the one God used to try and pull them out of the grave they were digging with their pride. They didn't want to change. So God took his light and walked it out the door with you. That's why they feel so cold inside now, not because they're unloved, but because they are no longer seen. Their new relationships lack spiritual eyes. No one's soul is tuned in. No one can hear their inner scream beneath the confident tone. Because no one else was sent, no one else was called. You were. And now the narcissist stands in rooms full of people, yet feels entirely unseen, entirely untouched, entirely alone. That is the price of abusing covenant. That is the pain that comes after heaven's separation. That is the echo of what happens when someone misuses a person God placed as an instrument of mercy. They did it to themselves. 5. Their nights are restless, because when God leaves, the soul begins to scream. There's a reason God often speaks in the night, because when the noise of the world fades and the masks fall away. Only then can the soul be fully confronted. But for the narcissist, the night is no longer a time of reflection or peace. It has become a time of unraveling, and no one sees it but heaven. They may act composed during the day. They may laugh at lunch, shake hands in meetings, and appear perfectly fine. But when the lights go out and they're finally alone, when there are no more people to impress, no more noise to drown out their thoughts, something begins to stir in the dark, something they cannot silence and cannot escape. It begins with tension in the chest, a pressure they can't explain, a restless tossing and turning. The mind races, replaying conversations, rewriting memories, twisting facts to soothe their guilt. But no matter how many times they reframe it, the truth refuses to be buried. It rises again, like a wave, heavy and unrelenting. The image of your face, the sound of your last words, the weight of what they lost. They scroll on their phone late into the night, desperate for distraction. They flip through social media, watching others live, comparing themselves to people they once looked down on. But instead of feeling entertained, they feel irritated, triggered, hollow. Because the more they consume, the more they realize they no longer know how to feel. Emotions are distant, like voices through thick glass, and joy, that's a stranger now. They may fall asleep eventually, but it's never restful. The dreams are fragmented. Their subconscious brings up things they've tried to bury, moments of cruelty, manipulation, betrayal, and above all, your absence. In their dreams, they often see you, not angry, but healed, not broken, but elevated. And that image is unbearable, because somewhere inside, even in sleep, their soul knows what they forfeited. It wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the removal of mercy. This is what happens when someone refuses to repent. God doesn't always strike them with external storms. Sometimes he lets the collapse begin internally, in the private hours, in the quiet torment of the night. He removes his covering, he lifts his peace, and what's left is exposure. Not the kind the world sees, but the kind that erodes the soul from within. It shows up in anxiety that medication can't fix, in fatigue that sleep doesn't heal, in mood swings that no therapist can fully explain, because the root is not psychological, it's spiritual. They are under divine pressure, and their spirit is breaking. And here is the tragic irony. They once called you too much, too intense, too emotional, too spiritual, too sensitive. They mocked the very parts of you that were alert to God. But now they would give anything for a taste of that stillness you carried, that calm that followed you even when chaos surrounded you, because now the chaos is in them and there's no place to run. You were the only person they could be quiet around, even if they didn't know why. The only persons whose presence didn't feel like performance, the only one who didn't demand a version of them, but simply saw through it. That kind of presence cannot be imitated, and it cannot be replaced. Now they lie in bed beside someone else, and still feel unseen. They talk more than ever, and still feel unheard. They touch and are touched, but feel nothing, because numbness is what fills the space where God's peace once rested, and where there is no peace, there can be no rest. They are exhausted, not because they're overworked, but because their soul is heavy with truth they refuse to face. That's the weight of pride. That's the cost of rebellion. That's what happens when someone pushes away a gift God placed in their life, not for pleasure, but for transformation. And when that gift is gone, when the presence that once held back the storm is removed, the flood begins. Slowly, silently, but always surely. You were the dam. Now the dam is gone, and the waters are rising in the night. They check their phone at 2 a.m., wondering if you still think about them. They visit your page in secret, trying to read between the lines. They look for signs that you're broken, struggling, regretting, but find none. And that is what breaks them. Because now they see it clearly. You didn't just leave, you were lifted. And they weren't just left behind, they were exposed. They thought you needed them, but the truth is, they needed the God you carried. And now that God has removed you, the quiet has become unbearable. The nights have turned into judgment, and the silence in their soul is no longer peaceful, it is terrifying. They close their eyes, hoping to rest, but the weight follows them into sleep. Because when God leaves a room, what remains is not empty. What remains is conviction. And conviction without repentance becomes torment. This is the hidden collapse, the unraveling no one sees, the consequence no one talks about, the slow, silent justice of a holy God who allowed someone to feel what it's like when his covering is gone.